Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And today on the show is a guest I've been waiting to interview for a long time. Rob Bonnar is a Global Procurement Director at SHV Energy, the largest global distributor of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, as we commonly know it, with responsibility for procurement transformation of indirect procurement. Now, prior to SHV, Rob has enjoyed leadership roles at companies like AB InBev, GSK, BP, and Visteon, a former operating division of Ford Motor Company. And I've actually known Rob for 20 years, going back to our time joining Ford as part of the same graduate intake. Our paths have crossed many times since, and I'm delighted to welcome him on the show this week. In today's episode, Rob shares with me his experiences in elevating procurement's impact in a distributed organization. It's one made up of a number of different operating units and brands spread across the world. And so, as I always do, I start by asking Rob if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Phil, because I find so many different people in procurement who, as you say, they just stumbled upon it and then said, "Hey, this seems interesting," and that's pretty much my journey as well. Yeah, so I started as a chemist and quickly realised that sitting in a lab all day wasn't going to work for me, and so I looked at the Ford graduate scheme, and obviously at Ford they had a really strong procurement team. And I moved into procurement. I really loved it, and I stuck with it. So I suppose it didn't find me, but I stumbled upon it. Let's say, yeah. And then I've been, at Ford at the time. There was a real big opportunity as they broke off Visteon, and so in automotive, that was the time of the great change in automotive. Yeah.
Right.
And so there was huge opportunity, and I think that was the thing. The two sides that really attracted me to the profession at the time were the idea of that I enjoyed procurement, but also that I saw such great opportunity in it to do so many diverse things. So you can launch a product, you can manage a category, you can go and manipulate an entire supply chain, and those opportunities really attracted me.
And for listeners, both Rob and I basically did the same thing at the same time, didn't we? You may have been a year before or after me. I'm not quite sure which way around, or maybe it was the same year as me.
I think it was about.
But we both joined that Ford grad scheme.
Yes, yeah, exactly that, and it was a great time. We shouldn't reminisce too much on the good old days, Phil, but it was good.
Yeah, we'll just spend the next 45 minutes chatting about how things used to be 20 years ago. And then we can't believe that it was 20 years ago.
No, not at all.
So you were in automotive, and then I'm not sure if you jumped from automotive to pharma, but you've certainly been in a number of different industries then. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about kind of the broader context of the type of roles, the type of industries that you have been in.
Yeah, so I'd break my career into three sections. So I'd say first section, direct procurement, middle section, supplier-enabled innovation, really, and then the third section in indirect procurement. And I often break it down as saying I did cars, drugs, booze, and now energy. Yeah, but I've done some different industries, and the transition from automotive to pharma was pretty simple, really, for me, based on the fact I was a chemist originally. So people see that as being completely different, but obviously procurement is transferable, and also having a comfort with the environment made it easier. I moved into that section of my career where I was looking at supplier-enabled innovation and really working with the scientists to look at new product research, new product development, and then, well, you could cynically say trying to get them to not go too crazy at the front end, because we knew we wouldn't be able to deliver it at the back end. But basically pushing procurement further upstream is how I'd describe it. So to be really at the cutting edge of their, whenever they came up with an idea, they'd check it with me to say, look, is there already an existing supply chain? Is there a way we could use this either material or process in a way that would benefit us, and we could really deliver an outcome, and it would take off rather than die on the bench.
Right.
Yeah.
So how would be some of the ways, because supplier-enabled innovation is one of the things I think we still struggle with a little bit, and we still talk about as one of the value levers for procurement, but how did you approach kind of the bringing suppliers in so they would actually be willing and able to share innovations with you that you could then build on?
Yeah, and so obviously, if you look at pharma companies, supplier-enabled innovation is really important because most pharma companies are effectively valued on their pipeline, so they want to keep filling that pipeline. So
Yeah.
they say, look, there already was a business desire behind it, so I wasn't pushing against a closed door. And the things that we had, so obviously we had the websites where people could pitch us things. Yeah, which I think is really important to set out your stall and say, hey, we're open. Yeah, so first off, let people know you're open. Give them an easy method to get in touch, and so that you're not, trying 100 different people on LinkedIn to try and find the right guy, etc. Yeah, so you've got a pathway to get to you. And then some of the programs or projects that we undertook. So we do supplier innovation days where we give a topic out to either, obviously, of course, incumbent suppliers, but also anyone that had reached out to us previously to say, hey, we've got this unmet need or this area of either science or manufacturing that we'd like to look at, and invite the pitch. So make it easy, then invite the pitch. And so we had innovation days where we'd focus on, I don't know, silica or something like that, and everyone that was involved in any way with silica would come along and almost do like a trade stand, an internal trade stand, just to pitch. But some of the most exciting things that I really enjoyed were where we had an unmet need and we had an idea of what the solution could be, but we had multiple different suppliers who might be involved. Was the piece of innovation that I found most exciting there was to workshop it collectively. So to say, okay, you're all competitors. At the end of the day, you're competing for the business, but you're also competitors outside of this room. But let's put it to one side and find the best solution here. That it may involve all of you, it may involve none of you. In the end, we might decide we can do it better ourselves. But at least everyone's had a really good opportunity to pitch, what they think could be the best solution. And I found, I suppose I was surprised at how open suppliers and partners really were to that, because it gives everybody a level playing field. They can come in and they don't have to spend loads of time rubbishing each other. They can just focus on what the benefits that they could bring and why they think that's the right solution. And as long as you get that mindset right, then I found that a really powerful way of finding an innovative solution to a problem.
Yeah. Now, would they all be in the same room then together doing that? Because, like you say, you're kind of surprised that they would be open. There's obviously something you have done to create a safe space where they feel comfortable in doing that.
Yeah, well, obviously, so my main breakthrough, I think, was getting them in the room together. Yeah, so yes, there are different ways you could have staged it, but to get everyone together and just talk about maybe thought leadership in this space. Yeah, what does good look like? What does great look like? Yes, you have to create the safe space, but also that, of course, they're not going to expose potentially their entire crown jewels, to their competitors. Anything that's really, the next step, you have to do some follow-ups to get hold of that. But you can build maybe 80-90% of the solution there, and then yes, you have to do pre-work and post-work with each of those vendors to make sure you've really got to the excitement from them. But yeah, I was really surprised at how open people were to that idea. And then that I would say was maybe a different path that we normally take to supplier partnership, because if you're focused on the partnership aspect, you maybe don't open it up. So you focus on, you say, well, we're an SAP shop or whatever, let's focus with SAP on this, grand, and you build that pathway even in your mind of, okay, what's next from that provider. Then actually, if you're able to stop, take a minute and just open it up, you can find unexpected solutions.
How did you find that? How did you incent them to be open to doing that and to sharing? Is it we're
Yeah.
such a big company, and if you don't, then you're losing 1/5 of the potential market, or was it you were doing more things to be like a customer of choice?
Yeah. Well, I definitely want. Obviously, I want to shy away from the first bit. The idea that we were twisting their arm, Phil, to get them in the room. But no, obviously, yes, we were attractive. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you have to have an attractive value proposition in the first place to say, hey, yes, we're either a big part of the market or we're pushing at the boundaries, disrupting, whatever you want to call it, so that you become an attractive customer to them.
Yeah.
But I think it's in the pre-work and then the post-work. So showing the commitment to actually have the proper discussion with them, and being credible in that there is some actual business at the end, that someone will get something. Yeah. So
Hmm.
you're less likely to be successful if you continually run those events and then no one gets anything. Yeah. Not that you have to you don't
Right.
have to throw everyone a bone, but
Yeah.
everyone has to believe there is a bone somewhere. Yeah. They have to see the bone. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, they're not,
They
they're
give up
less
trying.
next time. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you talked about working cross industry, whether it's auto, pharma, FMCG. You said brewing, oil
Yes.
and gas. A lot of those industries are ones where procurement professionals, it's easy for them to get kind of siloed, and you're an automotive buyer, or you can only support FMCG, because you've just maybe been in that area for a while, or
Yes.
because if you're outside of those industries, you may think that what you do is different from what somebody does in another industry. So you've obviously been able to transcend that as you've gone across different industries. My question really is from a leadership perspective. When you're looking at bringing somebody in from, let's say that you're in an oil and gas organization, and you're looking at bringing somebody in from automotive. Like, what are the things that you kind of look for that gives you an idea that that person may actually be able to kind of jump out of that industry and into another?
Uh, well, so it's a really good question, Phil, because yes, most of the people, in each of my moves, most of the people that have, say in pharma, yes, there were a lot of chemists. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't get past it. There were a lot of people who had some kind of science. Yeah, because they were able to relate to the environment. But
Hmm.
then in each of those areas, you're right. I've heard that whole idea. Yeah, but automotive is very specific or very special. You couldn't bring someone else in here or farm. Everyone does it in every industry,
Hmm.
but also even in the specialisms of procurement. So you say, well, no, you couldn't possibly buy IT if you've never bought IT before. Say, well, look,
Right.
there's always a first day for everyone, and so the
Hmm.
piece that I'm really always looking for is the ability for the person to see the problem, the situation that you've got, and relate it to what they've already done. So,
Hmm.
if you're looking from oil and gas and you're looking at automotive, for example, they say, well, look, hey, we're building this category strategy and it's in pumps or valves or whatever. And then, okay, if they bought pumps or valves in automotive, they can definitely talk about that. But even if they haven't, they can talk about how you build a strategy. They can talk about how they would go about understanding the stakeholder engagement, the supplier search and analysis of the market, the not maybe not as formulaic as showing me the 40 slide deck that they would do for a category
Yeah.
strategy, but definitely being able to apply those same principles and the skills that they've built. And I think being able to show that to the interviewer in the new industry is more than 50% of the battle. Yeah, because I think
Hmm.
it shows that you're smart enough to be able to figure things out on your own. You're not going to have to be led by the hand, and that you've already got the skills. So I think
Yeah.
that's the key to what I would look for is the willingness and the aptitude to actually think already, to start putting themselves into the role and see how the skills they've got could bring value.
Hmm. Yeah, and I ask that because I think that it's one of the challenges that a lot of procurement teams have is they hire a lot of. It's not really necessarily the right way of saying it, but kind of me too. It's like
Yes.
somebody who has been in that industry for a long time and knows the industry and kind of afraid because there's a perception of risk of bringing somebody from outside, and yet that's where all the diversity of thought comes from. Is when you bring in people from different industries who can look at things with a fresh eye.
Yeah,
Um,
totally
and
agree.
I just think that we don't do that enough.
Yeah, I agreed. It's difficult not to become siloed, and so when I chart the course of my career so far, I can see the links that so in pharma, and then I started buying SAP services, and then my next role we had a big SAP rollout, so they knew that I already had some
Hmm.
understanding, So
Yeah.
there are links and bridges you can build that obviously I really have enjoyed diversity of industry and diversity of role. And I think it is a great strength for people. There is obviously great strength in being an expert, and we should let
Hmm.
experts talk when they, when there is someone with expertise, then you should listen. Yeah, but I think there's also benefit in that broadening of your skill set that can enable moves that maybe you don't immediately see.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about the current situation that you have. So, you're a procurement leader for SHV Energy.
Yes.
For people who aren't familiar with SHV, I just wonder if you could share a little bit of context from an organization perspective, and then we'll just talk a little bit more broadly about some of the things that you've done in terms of the
Yeah.
procurement team there.
Yeah. Grand. So the easy way to think of it is that SHV Energy is an energy company which has a long tradition in gas, so LPG,
Hmm.
but is firmly committed to the energy transition. So, looking at renewable or non-fossil energy
Hmm.
solutions, and is committed to transitioning to 100% non-fossil. Yeah? So that's, let's say, when you're thinking of joining an oil and gas or energy company, that people have some conceptions or preconceptions about exactly what that
Yeah.
means. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really strong commitment that that organization has made that attracted me, and it attracts others to say, look,
Hmm.
yes, we've got a strong history in fossil. We can't do anything about that. But the way in which they're positioning for that energy transition is really interesting. So they have a number of
Yeah.
businesses globally. So Pinnacle Propane in the US, in Texas, not or based in Texas, not in Florida, but near you, but or Calar Gas here in the UK near where I am, etc. But yeah, they have a
Hmm.
number of those different gas companies, but also that focus on non-fossil and renewable. Then
Yeah, talk
the
about
gas,
a transformation, like in transformation of a
yeah,
historical business model. It's
yes,
kind of
yeah.
turning the company on its head, and I guess the whole industry is faced with that right now.
Well, there still is a strong place for LPG, but the one of the key things that SHV Energy is already doing is they have renewable or non-fossil LPG as an offering that really
Hmm.
enables them to be part of that transition already, where they're taking
Yeah.
existing customers and starting to move them away from fossil using the same equipment, the same machinery that they've already got. It does make it a bit easier, that transition, but then
Hmm.
that's probably not going to be the end of the transition. And I think that
Right.
a company that's forward looking enough to be positioning for that next step as well is I think well positioned as part of the energy solutions that we all require. Yeah.
Hmm. Now, knowing the types of companies that you worked for in the past, those were some large organizations with huge
Yeah.
procurement teams and a lot of structure and infrastructure and everything that comes with it.
Yes.
As you look for the next stage in your career, what was kind of I hesitate to use the word, what did you find? Because
Yeah.
I think you knew what you were doing when you started it, but what was the kind of journey that you were looking to go on when you
Yeah.
took the role that you did at SHV?
Yeah, and so the main attraction to me was the fact that the company had a desire already to really push forward with a procurement agenda. Yeah, so
Hmm.
again, I wasn't pushing against a closed door. There already was a
Yeah.
real desire for that, but they had a very decentralized model up to that point, and so that's the bit I talk more about, is the idea of coming into any organization. So, as you say, in those larger organizations that I had worked on before, and you and I worked in together, they had a huge procurement team, already really centralized organization, and of
Hmm.
course then a very centralized procurement function. Coming into an organization that has not got that was completely different, and therefore obviously quite attractive. So to say,
Yeah.
actually, let's look at it from a slightly different lens. there were already procurement professionals there. There were already procurement teams within each of the business units. So the real interesting piece was to see, okay, how can we pull all of that strength that we've already got together and build a centralized procurement organization, or start to centralize a procurement organization in an organization that isn't already as centralized as some other organizations I've worked in. And so, yeah, that was the real attraction, and of course the challenge. And so when I reflect on my learning so far, I say, well, look, for anyone, it could be someone starting their procurement career in an organization like that, or it could be someone who's already done a few years like us and has come to a new challenge, a new way of looking at things. That I say the challenge of how you build momentum in quite a decentralized organization, I think is a quite a specific challenge, but I think a lot of people may face it at different points. And so obviously there's a bit of storytelling. So to start with, of course, there's a bit of setting out your stall, explaining to people why. There's the normal piece about quick wins, gaining your place at the table, trying to prove yourself. That those pieces, those are pretty much the same in any procurement role. Yeah, just depending on the stakeholder group, it could be easier or harder. And but the piece for me that I thought we did really well at this organization is to focus on maturity of the function as well as just pure savings and winning a place at the table. And so I really have enjoyed that journey. So to say, hey, we've got people who have great strengths already. Yeah, none of us are a fully perfect diamond. We're not all polished in exactly the same way, but they already have some great strengths that we can utilize across the group. So we take the specialism and we try and bring everyone up to the same level up, to the same level, but also to fill some of the gaps. Yeah, so to say for example, if we in most organizations, the first thing that you struggle with is access to data. Okay, how do we get the access to the data to enable us to improve? So I think that most people would imagine that the first thing you got to do is just understand the landscape. So focus on that data, and everyone's got a different way of recording the data, storing the data, analyzing the data already. So looking in a pragmatic fashion at the steps that you can take with each of the disparate or decentralized functions or organizations within the group, and trying to pull them together. I think that data piece was obviously the key immediate focus. So understanding what we're spending, who, with, and why. And then that really is a huge turning point for that discussion about what aspiration we can set. So we've got an ambition, but really for whether it's a specific business unit. So you take a small business unit and they've got maybe half a head in procurement. And you say, well, look, guys, let's not shoot to boil the ocean. Yeah, let's set our aspirations at manageable steps that we can work on together, and we will be, the sense of accomplishment at actually achieving something with that challenge will be, so much greater than if we just look at the long journey ahead of us the whole time.
So would you then look at each individual business unit, as you said, it's a decentralized organization, and kind of, have different goals and objectives for each one of them. So you're not managing to we want to be here at a high level for everybody, but this is what's relevant and what's needed based on each individual business unit, and try and plan to that.
Yeah, exactly that. So I would say if you're faced with this challenge, then obviously everyone's perception is their truth. Yeah. So in each of those organizations, whether they be stakeholder groups, whether they be business units, whatever they are, they have a view of what procurement is and what procurement can be. So the first job is to tell them if you agree what procurement can be. Yeah. So what is the ambition together? So setting out clearly, this is our overall strategy and where we would like to get to, and then not tailoring, but making it real for them. Yeah. So you can't be, you can't please all the people all the time, Phil. We know that. Yeah. But you
Right.
can set out that ambition and say, this is definitely where we all want to go. We all agree. This is therefore how I believe we can do it with your spend. So whether that
Mm-hmm.
be upskilling the people, changing the process, policy, or tool, whether it is just looking at some key targeted interventions in sourcing or supplier relationships and
Mm-hmm.
supplier relationship management, those things will be really tangible and real to them, and it will, it will certainly build the momentum that you require. As long as they're all targeted towards the same ambition, then yes, there's no problem that they're all starting from different maturity
Yeah.
levels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would you look at your internal team on those lines as well? So in terms of your support of the business, you know, how were you kind of assessing what the
Yeah.
support levels were versus what each one of the business units needed?
Yeah, and so obviously a number of check-ins with each of those business units. So to say, hey, how's the journey progressing? Yeah, and
Yeah.
to make sure that the key stakeholders in that business unit have a mechanism for giving you immediate and valuable feedback. But then looking at, so obviously I started off with a fairly basic, let's say, maturity assessment framework where we got
Mm-hmm.
people to really own the assessment of themselves. So whether that
Yeah.
be from the business unit or from the category as a whole. So to say, right, in my category, if that's my strategic ambition, this is the kind of maturity that I require to accomplish that. Where are
Mm-hmm.
we? So looking at
Yeah.
all of the different individuals that are contributing to that category maturity, as well as in a business unit, looking across all the categories. Yeah. So to try and compare those two, and we have, when I say obviously I started with a basic version. Well, that was the place to start. Right now, of course, we've
Mm-hmm.
got more and more mature. So we've now got all the KPIs automatically calculated in Power BI, such that it becomes more of a quantitative
Yeah.
discussion rather than a
Mm-hmm.
qualitative where do we feel. But definitely that qualitative where do we feel we are was the right. I still believe in it as the right way to start. So if someone's looking at this journey, I don't think they should immediately try to jump straight to the KPIs and the metrics automated in a
Right.
dashboard, because it drives a completely different set of behaviors. And that's the thing that I think was one key learning for me is the qualitative piece at the start enables people to feel ownership and buy in. And
Mm-hmm.
then it also stops, like if you put a KPI of X% of contracts stored in the, or contractual coverage of X% of spend in the tool, then suddenly that's your focus. Yeah. When you say,
Yeah.
well, like, why? Yeah. The main part of the journey is, first off, do you have contracts? And second off, can we have a look at them all together? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's focus on that piece first. And then we'll get into the metric and the dashboard. It could be 6 months, a year, 18 months down the line. You build that dashboard and it helps. So I would say it feels like, or it can feel like you're doing a bit too much qualitative at the start. But I really see a great need for that, Phil. I see a place for that in the journey, because it builds the buy-in and the trust, the mutual trust.
Yeah. You have to have the influence before you can
Yeah,
start to optimize it.
yeah, agreed.
And you mentioned kind of 6, 12, 18 months. I mean, what was the time frame that you really looked at from okay, now that we're starting to build on some of these relationships, now let's take it to more of a metric driven assessment. Like how long did you go from one kind of extreme to the other extreme?
Yeah, so well, obviously it depends on data availability. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
that pace was really, even if I had said, "Hey, we'll do it in 6 months," we'd never have managed, because it's all about actually getting access to the data that you never had in the first place. Yeah, so it's building that new, the data lake and the connections that you never had. So yeah, on a like an 18-month horizon for starting to look at bringing in more of a quantitative or a KPI and metric driven assessment of those pieces, I would think would be sensible
Mm-hmm.
for people, because within that time, you're going to have a lot of work to do to get access to the right data to be able to drive those metrics anyway. Obviously, it's possible in some organizations to do that faster, but I think in a decentralized organization, you shouldn't set too aggressive a target for yourself with regards to standardizing the approach, because that's always going to be the challenge. And then I think, though, right from the start, you can start having that qualitative discussion. So to say, right, how do we feel? Where do we feel we are? And my gut on that is the idea you should be setting 3 to 5 year targets right from the start. Because if you say to someone, even if you've got a scale of 0 to 5 on any particular metric, then you're not going to jump from 0 to, it's not going to be 0 to 4 and then, hey, we'll fine tune to 5. No,
Right.
You're going to have to grind through them all. Yeah. So particularly in the big gap areas, you want to be setting, okay, in 3 to 5 years, where are we going to be? What is right for that part of the business? Because it might not be that they need to have, every contract in there. They'll manage a lot through PO. Yeah. For example, just back to that earlier example, it might not be that you want to get to 100% contract coverage. You might be comfortable with a fair chunk of it on, a P card or PO, etc. And therefore setting that aspiration to say, look, we're shooting for a 3, and in the next year we're going for a 1.5, whatever it is. Yeah, so that you know it's achievable and it's pragmatic and realistic.
As you start to bring the data together,
Yes.
you mentioned it. I mean, it's particularly tough when you're in a decentralized organization when everyone has different systems.
Yes.
Like, what were the kind of sources of data that you're looking to bring into into a single environment?
So the interesting thing for me is, if you look at the procurement process, obviously we want you to understand about the spend in the first place. Then, so that was our immediate focus. Get some idea of the spend, categorization, whether you call it category tree or segmentation, yeah. And then in particular around maybe not vendor master, but at least cleansing vendor, and definitely not material master as a start, but having some decent categorization. Yeah. So I'd say for people who are facing an environment where there's multiple ERPs and maybe there hasn't been the focus on procurement, therefore you find that, I don't know, it takes something, office supplies. So if you really want to know which pens you're buying, you're stuck. Yeah. Because actually we know that it's just going in there with the vendor's name, yeah, and a number next to it, and a spend next to it. So just categorizing as a start point. Never mind, material master is not the target on day one. Yeah, good to cleanse it and try to improve it for the future, but not to go back and try and solve all the problems that have happened before. So categorization and a bit of vendor cleansing, so you know exactly who's who and you understand there. Then moving into source to contract. So the key pieces there about, okay, contractual coverage. Contractual coverage, what contracts you've got, when they're running out, what they actually cover, and then that's the basics of it. Then you start to get a bit smarter about, okay, what are the different clauses that are in those contracts? What liabilities do we have? And you start to use that data and grow a bit more on the maturity of source to contract. But for day one, just knowing what's there and what's going on is, of course, the target. And then the procure to pay metrics. So all the fancy sourcing in the world is great, but if you don't actually end up paying a vendor, then you're in trouble pretty quick. Yeah. So all of that piece around so people often obviously think about P2P. It's mainly about compliance and automation. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's true. But for a start point, it's really just about understanding the way each of the business units are operating. So what size of POs are they placing? First off, are they doing a PR or some kind of pre-PO process? Yeah. Then what's the way in which they're approaching PO, and then the in terms of invoice, goods receipt, etc. Well, are they doing a 3-way match or some other kind of match? And then how's the money getting out the door? So it's more about those metrics on P2P to start with, and then you can start to get fancy about making sure that you're harmonized across everyone that places a PO for the same thing, places at the same price, and you don't have variation by day or by individual or by site and all that kind of good stuff. But getting those basics of P2P first. And so that basic data set, that to start with, when you're doing it qualitatively, I think you want to make that quite tight, because what you're actually asking is the individual that you're asking to join in on your journey. You're asking them to calculate that for you, to go in and dig it out because you haven't automated it yet, and that's a big ask, and can be very off-putting. So people have thrown mud at procurement professionals before about saying, "Hey, you're always just asking me for info. You're always a one-way street of I want more and more and more, and then I'll make your sourcing decision." Yeah, grand. Well, actually, even worse, then I'll just come and meddle with your own sourcing decisions, which they really don't like. But yeah, that piece around making that first piece when you're asking the individual to do the work for you, making that as painless as you can, I think is important. So start with a focus on the full procurement piece, but focus in on specific areas that you think would make a big difference in your organization.
And I'm just going to come back to touch on one thing, just because I know that for a lot of organizations who are just beginning of the journey and they're looking at, trying to understand my spend and spend analysis, kind of one of the biggest roadblocks I always see is taxonomy. What kind of taxonomy should we use? Should we use an off-the-shelf taxonomy? Should we build it ourselves? Should we adjust what we have, or and everything in between? So what was your kind of approach to building a taxonomy around your spend?
So there already obviously were some ideas in place. So I'd say on your example there, I go for number 3, which was to adjust what we've already got, to try and tweak it, to improve, to iterate or improve, rather than to throw it all out and start again. And the only reason for avoiding that is probably why most people end up with that, if they've already got something, is to say it's a really brave jump to go and completely change. If you want traceability backwards, if you're willing to say, right, we start today, then of course moving to that next level is absolutely fine. But if you're looking at the let's say recategorizing all of your historic spend to your new taxonomy, is a huge chunk of work for the organization that probably when you're starting out on the journey, people aren't going to buy into immediately, Phil, as well. That whole idea of it needs to be high impact and low touch for them, otherwise they're not joining you. So if I go to each of those procurement professionals and say, right, hey, you've just got to quickly change the taxonomy of all of the work that you've done before, then you lose them pretty quick. So I think yes, definitely to iterate. I haven't either, Phil, in any of my other organizations done a complete change of taxonomy. I haven't experienced that one. So maybe also just through never having been brave enough to do it before, I wasn't brave enough here either.
I think it depends on what comes before you as well, because sometimes it may be that there really was nothing and you're starting from scratch. And so you have stuff that you're pulling from, the ledger, the general ledger or something like that, but that's the extent of your taxonomy. So, where you're at that and you have the ability to start from scratch. But otherwise...
that's it. I think if you've got something, it's a big step to completely throw it out and start again.
The last question that I have is around actually making all this information accessible. So, how did you think about, you mentioned Power BI a couple of times just as you were talking through your journey, but how do you actually bring that to a place where, one, it's transparent, two, it's accessible, and it's actually easy to get your hands on it?
Yeah, and so, I think most procurement professionals out there know that one of the first things they should be doing is building a strong relationship with the guys in IT. So in particular for that reason, Phil, so is to say, hey, if you can partner up with those guys and let's say show that you're willing to help them on their journey, and that there are a couple of things you'd like from them, then I've been successful in a number of different organizations through doing that. So saying, look, hey, you want someone to help you prove a business case to invest in data and analytics. Hey, we're over here in procurement crying out for data and analytics. Let's use us as the guinea pig. Let's get on board. We'll be your kind of trailblazer, and we'll prove it together. So I think there's, particularly now, obviously, kind of pandemic situation has meant that most organizations have a huge focus on, of course, sustainability and risk, but then on the other side, on digitization or digitalization. So to say, actually, that piece, there's probably a great appetite right now to be able to do something with that. And so for me, with my current organization, that link to the data and analytics capability of the function really enabled, or the organization really enabled us to take great leaps forward with, I mentioned Power BI because I think there's a lot talked about it, but it's really, really powerful if you can get tapped into it. So to be able to just, and it doesn't have to be all singing and all dancing. I mean, it can be quite I was going to say dirty, but a quick and dirty approach is good enough to get started. Yeah. And it definitely is an area where I think people shouldn't be afraid of it. They should say, hey, let's just do something. Let's just get in, let's try and, improve it as we go, but let's get started, because I think immediately you see returns, as you say, about making it visual and making it available to people. So you don't want it to be like a report card or too much of a competition where everyone's saying, oh, but he's a 4 and I'm a 3. But you do want people to be able to see transparently where their peers are, because it enables all of that cross-pollination that we all get so excited about, where people spot someone's marked higher than them, they phone them and they say, hey, what have you done? Yeah. And they, even without it being a central initiative or you're really trying to drive it, just making that visibility enables people to serve and help themselves. And I think that's why I'm really excited about the access to data and the use of data enabling so much more in procurement now.
Well, Rob, I know that we're coming up against time here, and I know that you and I could probably speak for another couple of hours, as we often do. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences, insights, and the journey that you're on right now with listeners. Very last question is, if listeners would like to connect with you, learn a little bit more about what you're doing, just kind of connect, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, definitely. So I would be very happy to chat to people, of course, about, in particular about procurement, but then probably about almost anything else. But yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and I can't remember exactly, but I think I'm just LinkedIn/Rob Bonnar. So I should be simple to find.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link to your profile in our show notes page, so folks don't have to guess it. So that is going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast, and just search for this podcast today with Rob, and you'll find in the show notes Rob's LinkedIn profile to connect that way. So Rob, one last time, just thank you very much for joining me today. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes,